Hello, I'm Mike Parrish, Agriculture Extension Agent in Dinwiddie County, and I'm for the soil because it's the foundation to everything in agriculture.
Welcome to another episode of For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and joining me, Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. And this week we have a returning guest, and Eric, if you would reintroduce our special guest.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. We're very pleased to have Dr. Ray Weil with us from the University of Maryland. Dr. Weil was a co-author and author of a seminal textbook for soil science, the nature and properties of soils. I know when I took a basic soils class, that was the textbook that we used. And Dr. Weil's also been instrumental in cover crop research, forage radishes and biodrilling. And so we're very pleased to have Dr. Weil with us. And Dr. Weil, we'd like to ask you just the importance of context and really addressing farmers' resource concerns and starting from scratch with each person's context.
Eric, I think you're referring to cover crop practices in terms of the context of the farm. And of course, every farm is different, and every farmer is different, and every community in which they're farming is different. So all those things by community, that would include sort of the economic environment. Every year is different for that matter. Government programs and weather changing and markets changing. So all those are part of the context of how you can manage the soil and what you can afford to do and what it makes sense to do. I like to think of cover crops as being one of the best tools that we have to improve soils. Uh, it's a little bit like physical therapy to improve your body, or going to the gym to improve your body. Growing cover crops sort of exercises the soil, and it stimulates the biological aspects of the soil. It improves the physics of the soil. It improves the chemistry of the soil. So the old idea of giving a soil a rest, that was completely misguided. So in the old days, farmers used to actually leave fields, and if you left them fallow in the sense of letting the weeds grow and go through succession and be vegetated, that would be one thing. But they often tilled them to keep them bare and fallow, to give them a rest. Well, that concept is like being a couch potato is not particularly good for your body. Give you a rest, but that's not how you're going to improve your body. So we want the soil growing plants all the time, as much as possible. Obviously, sometimes in the dead of winter, the plants may not be growing. Although when you have a nice snow layer like we had last winter, it's pretty surprising what's growing underneath there. Maybe you took the opportunity to dig around under the snow when we had about a foot of snow on the ground. And if you were looking in a cover crop field, you probably saw those cover crops were nice and green and probably still active. I know I did here in Maryland, which is probably just a tad colder than in Virginia. So yeah, year-round active roots, which are feeding the microbes. So the plant is really acting as a kind of a conduit, a connector between the world of sunlight with all that solar energy coming into our planet and the sort of dark world that doesn't have solar energy down below in the soil. You can imagine if you crawled around in the soil and were a tiny microbe, there'd be no light. You probably wouldn't have any need for eyes because there's nothing to see. So a lot of soil organisms, little animals, they have vestigial eyes, but there's really, you don't need to put evolutionary effort into eyes if you're living in the dark. But the plant is capturing that sunlight, turning that into chemical energy and plant sugars, and then sending that down into the depths of the soil, sometimes very deep into the soil, 3 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, very deep. And so that's this connection that brings that solar energy into the soil. And when the plants aren't there, that's cutting off the energy source for everything living in the soil. So if you keep that in mind, and you'll probably be wanting to keep the plants going. Another aspect is that a lot of farmers, especially that are growing grain crops, um, don't appreciate how short the time is that those crops are really active in the soil. You know, after you plant the seed, it's going to be a week or two before it even germinates and emerges. And it's going to be a month before it starts to really permeate the soil with roots and you start to have leaves and your field looks green and you're kind of covering the ground enough to capture solar energy. So if you plant it on May 1st, it's probably mid-June before that field is really vegetated. And then by the middle of August, if we're talking about, say, a corn plant, that plant is filling seed, it's senescing, the old leaves are turning yellow, and the plant is cannibalizing itself and taking nutrients out of the old leaves and bringing it into the seed. So most of the nutrients that build the protein and the carbohydrates in the seeds are actually coming from the older parts of the corn plant. So that's why it turns yellow at the bottom. And when that's happening, when you see that in above ground, the plant is no longer sending food down to the roots. It's no longer putting energy into the roots, it's putting everything into the seed. So the roots are all dying, and there's really not much active root system. So you've really only got from mid-June to around mid-August, a couple of months out of 12, in which annual crop like corn or soybeans is actually active. So that's something I think most farmers think, well, the growing season is from the day I plant to the day I harvest. But there's actually at least a month in there when the plant is just drying down and becoming ready for harvest, but it's not physiologically active. It's not contributing to the soil. We'd like to get our cover crops planted when possible early enough so that they're growing while that while the cash crop is senescing, and that means some kind of interplanting. So that's one of the more recent challenges. So I'm always kind of looking at what are the challenges with managing soil and cover crops. It's pretty easy to go out with a no-till drill as soon as you can after harvest and get something in the ground, but it's not going to have much time to grow in the fall, and you'll have this long period of a couple of months where there's no real root activity. Getting a good stand with interseeding is a challenge. If you're broadcasting the seed, you're very dependent on rainfall, or if you have irrigation, that will certainly help. There are also ways of planting that seed much earlier in June. So you can drill between the rows and if you pick the right species that can survive in the dark under say a corn canopy, as soon as the corn starts to thin out and senesce, they'll start taking off. And by the time you harvest, you've got a nice green field of cover crop. The day you harvest it, your field will be green. So those are sorts of the cutting edge challenges. Now, if you're not a cover cropper, if you've been practicing traditional agriculture, you harvest, leave the fields bare. Heaven forbid, some farmers even plow in fall, and let it. They used to talk about letting the soil mellow over the winter. I mean, those are pretty misguided practices that leave the soil bare over the winter. So if you're just starting with cover crops, so where's a good place to start? Well, the best place to start is probably between your ears. You need to ask yourself, well, why do I want a cover crop? What do I think a cover crop can do for me? What do I want to focus on? If you think the price of nitrogen fertilizer is way too high because of geopolitical situations, and you want to grow a legume cover crop so that you can use a lot less nitrogen, well, then your main goal is to have as much nitrogen fixation as possible. If you want to suppress weeds, then you're going to do it differently. If you're trying to protect the soil from erosion or just build soil health, then you might want to have more diversity. So you first need to decide, so what is my objective here? Am I trying to cycle nutrients? Am I trying to fix nutrients, protect from erosion, conserve water? Do I have drought stress and low yields because of drought in the summer? Then creating a nice thick mulch over from the dead cover crop during the summer will help my crop yields and conserve water. So that's the first step, is figure out what are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that you want the cover crop to do, and then when can I plant them? What's my system like, and how could I maybe change that system? You can't necessarily just add the cover crops to exactly what you're doing now. You might want to change it, your rotation, or maybe get earlier maturing varieties of your cash crop to give you a better cover crop planting window. But you want to have a window of time that's going to give the cover crops an opportunity to grow at a time when your cash crop wouldn't be doing much. So the window is the second thing to think of. And once you've kind of figured out, well, I can plant at this time of year, and this is what I want to do, then you can start thinking about the species and what groups of cover crops really help. And usually we can think of cover crops as being grass species, which don't fix nitrogen, but they're often fine, have fine roots, and they often leave a good mulch, and they're competitive. Things like rye and wheat, barley, ryegrass, other grass species. And then we have all kinds of legumes. There's summer legumes, winter legumes that can fix nitrogen. And sometimes combining a little of those two actually improves both. And then we have other species like radishes and brassicas and other broadleaf species like buckwheat and sunflower. And just, there are dozens and dozens of species we could talk about. And they may have a role as well in weed suppression or nutrient cycling. So you really need to kind of think of, what do I want to do? What are my resources? How can I change what I'm doing? And speaking of change, one of the most discouraging things is planting a cover crop. It gets big. Often the farmers will get afraid of that, so they'll try to go out and kill it early. There's nothing to be afraid of with a big cover crop in terms of no-till planting, because planters work quite well into a living cover crop. But you do have to adjust the planter for the situation that you have. So if you've grown a high biomass cover crop and rolled it down, or just sprayed it and it's covering the soil, you want to have to make sure you've adjusted your planter for that condition. And it's probably not the same adjustment as for fields that don't have a cover crop. And if you fail to change your planter adjustments, the down pressure, the wave, whether you're using row cleaners, the coulters, making sure everything is level, you might be very disappointed. The seed may not get placed properly. And I've, met many farmers who have tried cover cropping once and they got a poor stand and they said, well, forget it. I'm not going to mess with that.
I hate to jump in here, but I know Mary is chomping at the bit with a question.
Mary, yeah.
Well, and I would be interested, Dr. Weil, what do you see? I know sometimes cover crops, you're not seeing the benefit always right after a year. It's depending on what that impact you're seeing. How do you advise farmers? Like, what is that? What is how long till they should be seeing that impact? Um, is there ever a negative impact at the beginning?
Yeah, you can have negative impacts. That's one of the reasons why cover crops aren't used by everybody. First of all, they cost time and money. It's another crop to manage. And so you have to get some benefit from that, or you're not going to spend the time and money. Uh, and one thing was what I just mentioned. If you don't have the planter adjusted, that is, you have to go out in that field and tinker with your planter, make sure it's working and placing the seed the way you want it. If you're just using the planter as you had for a field without cover crops, you may not get a good stand. It may put the seeds, it may not put the seeds deep enough, or it may not close the seed trench properly. And so that could be a negative effect, and that could be pretty discouraging. The problem, it's not that cover crops don't work, it's that you have to be aware of that and make those adjustments. I think there's some benefits that you see right away from cover crops. You certainly get erosion protection. If you have a field without a cover crop out there, and you pay attention, you'll see a lot of soil movement and a lot of sealing over, crusting over the soil. So your soil between the rows looks kind of like a pavement. And with a cover crop, it's going to be much more open, and the rain will soak in. So I think if you're having a water challenged year, like a year with maybe a wet spring and a dry summer, cover crops will probably pay for themselves in the first year, because they'll help that rain get in rather than run down the hill. And then in summer, they'll stop the evaporation and keep that, conserve that water. And I think you'll see a yield difference. Uh, if conditions are great, maybe you won't see that difference because the water wasn't a problem. Nitrogen fixation, you should be able to reduce your fertilizer application. But you want to have a good estimate of the biomass and the nitrogen content, and there are a lot of ways to do that. You can send samples off. You can even use green seeker type meters that will give you a pretty good estimate. So there's definitely things like nitrogen and erosion control and water that you're going to see just from the first time you use a cover crop if you're successful. The kind of soil health and resilience is something that builds up. Uh, Again, it depends if you're doing no-till or tilling that cover crop in. That's quite a big difference. If you're tilling the cover crop in, you're missing all the benefits of having the armor on the soil and protecting the surface, but you are getting much faster decomposition and much faster release of nutrients. So those are all things to consider.
Once again, we're talking with Professor Ray Weil. He is with the University of Maryland and an internationally recognized expert on soil science, nutrient cycling, soil organic matter, and cover crop systems. And I want to reference for our listeners, if you did not hear the last episode, if you'll do an internet search for University of Maryland Cover Crop Innovation Center, you will find a wealth of information at that website. And I'd also like to recommend a YouTube video that I discovered just a few months ago. It's called Soil Horizons in the Soil Pit with Professor Ray Weil. Just do a search for Soil Horizons on YouTube. Very interesting information there about soil pits and what you can learn about your soil through that practice. Unfortunately, our time is up in this episode. I want to thank you for your time, Dr. Ray Weil with the University of Maryland. Thank you for joining us, sir.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks. Nice to talk to all of you.
Eric and Mary, we'll catch you in the next one.
Yes, thank you, Jeff and Dr. Weil.
Thank you both.
For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.